Real talk, hormones are never going to be enough. And so I think sometimes we're so focused on the HRT conversation because it was done dirty for a long time, right? And so now we're like talking about HRT all the time, but I have to remind people, like, you have to eat your fiber, you have to exercise, like you have to limit your sugar intake. Like, just because you have HRT doesn't mean that suddenly you are totally protected from Alzheimer's, from cardiovascular disease, from all of these negative changes, like osteoporosis. It's one tool to help you, but you have to have a full arsenal in that kit to really support you.
Mike, do you want to jump in a little bit and tell us maybe about some of the concerns with using estrogen, or, the more standard approach with estrogen creams or internal supplements paired with maybe a progestin? Can you talk to us about that?
Sure. So I think I would agree across the board with what Kate had said. And I also do agree with some of the components that Dr. Jolene Brighton had mentioned. But I think it's important, like the general context here is that hormones in and of themselves aren't just going to be the final solution for a lot of people's issues, a lot of postmenopausal women issues. I think it's one piece of the overarching puzzle that can move the needle for women. And then I'm going to talk a second about specifically what we're talking about with hormones. But I think fundamentally, when I talk about hormones with people, with both men and women, I see them as signaling molecules. So they are components that tell cells and tissues what to do. And then from that, with that perspective in mind, the cells and the tissues actually need to have the appropriate resources to respond to those hormones. So that in this circumstance, that's going to be making sure that you have adequate micronutrient, you have adequate macronutrient, and then some of the other lifestyle components are dialed in effectively so that the cells and the tissues respond effectively to those hormones overall. And so that's why it's not just going to be you put hormones on board and everything's solved. It's going to be you organize the nutrition, your nutritional foundation, you organize what's going on with sleep, you organize what's going on with movement, you organize micronutrients, vitamin and mineral status, and then you also then bring the hormonal components on board. Because one thing that I see happen with women with hormones is sometimes it's really hit or miss. Sometimes they start using progesterone, estrogen, whatever the hormone is, and they get a really bad response, or sometimes it's a good response. And I think the first most important piece is getting the context under control and then add those in on top. So I tend to add the hormones in as I'm already organizing some of these other components. Now, in terms of some of the hormones specifically, if you, at least from my reading of the research, when you look at some of the dynamics, when you're talking about estrogen therapy, the only estrogen therapy that has really been shown to have a lot of these benefits, or at least in the vast majority of studies, is only the transdermal stuff. And it's very, very low dose that you see. And the way, when I'm looking at this type of stuff and I'm looking at labs, a lot of women who are postmenopausal that I'm looking at, and I ratio their progesterone to estradiol value, they are shifted towards estradiol already. Even though both progesterone and estradiol are low, they're shifted almost entirely towards estrogen across the board. So just throwing estrogen on board, I think, is questionable in that circumstance. And the first steps with hormones, at least when I'm looking at things, is I'm tending to say, okay, let's look at progesterone, let's look at DHEA, let's look at pregnenolone, let's consider what's going on potentially with testosterone, let's look at what's going on with thyroid function, because a lot of postmenopausal women are dealing with thyroid issues. And then you get to that next step and say, okay, now what's going on with this balance with the progesterone and the estradiol? But as an example, my own mom, she has a clotting disorder, and she went to the doctor and they put her on oral estrogen ASAP. And it's like, they're trying, and I'm just like, I had to go back and forth with the practitioner and be like, this is inappropriate. She has a known clotting disorder and she's on an oral estrogen, and there's no support for using the oral estrogen for her. She doesn't need an oral estrogen. She's hypothyroid and she needs progesterone when you ratio the values in her labs. Then you can talk about estrogen later on, but it's definitely not going to be any of the oral stuff. So for me, it's doing it in a systematic approach, making sure the foundational components are covered first. And these other hormones, I think, are more central and more important, because when you look at the hormonal risks, the higher risks are with the estrogens, that you get the clotting and you get the carcinogenic risks from the estrogens. When you're looking at progesterone and DHEA, pregnenolone, and even appropriately dosed testosterone, that's a whole other story, because women are getting pelleted with really high testosterone levels. I think that's problematic. But when you look at those hormones, typically the downsides for them are much lower, and they have a variety of benefits, and they are opposing each level of stress. they're opposing the stress systems across the board. And the other hormones, well, it's kind of a mixed bag when you start to look at some of those components. So I'd say when I'm looking at the hormones, that's what I tend to look at. And I have the foundation first. And the last piece I want to mention in here that's really important is when you go through some of the studies, and Dr. P has mentioned this many times, when you go through the studies, when they're talking about progestogens or they're talking about progestins, they're not talking about bioidentical progesterone. And you really got to dig in the papers to try to see, well, what are you talking about here? Oh, medroxyprogesterone acetate. It's like, well, that's not what you want to use, because the outcomes from the synthetic progestins and progestogens are not good at all. They're pretty terrible. Whereas the ones, when you look at bioidentical progesterone, at the worst, it is neutral. And at the best, it has benefits across the board for a variety of components. And if anybody's going to use estrogen, they really need to have they need to have progesterone on board bioidentical, because it is protective of the effects of estrogen if it's even needed in that circumstance. So there's multiple pieces with the hormonal picture. And I think HRT is making its comeback now because of some of the new studies. But I think some of the studies that I've seen are basically saying the same things that we saw before. Even some of the newer studies, look, oral estrogen is not a good idea. We know this. And then synthetic estrogens are not a good idea. And then the progesterone still keep synthetic progestins still keep coming out negative. And then when you look at the other hormones, DHEA and progesterone and testosterone and pregnenolone have almost all of these same benefits that you would see from even using the estrogen-based therapy. So that's how I tend to look at it. And that's usually how I'm looking to address things. And I will look at labs. I'm looking at that ratio between progesterone and estradiol. I'm looking at the hormonal systems, and I'm making sure the foundational components are dialed in. Because a lot of times that stuff's out of whack. By the time I have gotten a postmenopausal woman, she's gone through 50 diets, cycling up and down with her weight, lost a bunch of lean muscle tissue, and then the hormonal systems are completely out of whack. And it's okay, there's quite a few things that we have to get under control here. And it's not just, boom, slap your hormones on, and there you go.
Well, thank goodness for you, Mike, for helping your mom out. I'm sure she's grateful too to have someone that understands this and took the time to think about it in a more rational way.
She had already had a pulmonary embolism from taking birth control, and that's in her health history. So, and she tells everybody about it. So it's the fact that you decide that oral estrogen is a good idea for this person is terrible. That's a terrible recommendation for somebody like that. And, again, it's just because estrogen is safe. It's only the synthetic ones are bad. It's no, even the non-synthetic estrogens orally dosed have these problems. But yeah, for my mom, I told her that before she started, but your family members don't listen to you.
Does she have a uterus? Does she have a hysterectomy?
She does have a uterus.
Okay. So they did put her on some level of progesterone then.
Oh, I put her on progesterone. I told her she had to go on progesterone first, and then I looked at her thyroid panels. I was like, you may want to talk to your doctor about getting a prescription for thyroid, because her problem was she was hypothyroid. So she was gaining weight and she was losing some of her hair and stuff like this. And she went on the thyroid. She lost the weight. She felt a lot better. I fixed up her diet, covered her micros. And I was like, hey, you may want to use some progesterone because your balance is really skewed towards estrogen. Obviously, with hypothyroidism, you can typically see that because of the change in metabolism. And then, then when she went to go get the script from this natural doctor, the natural doctor convinced her about taking oral estrogens. And then we had the battle. I had to battle a little bit between, because my mom doesn't know. And she's like, well, the doctor says, and you say, and I don't know what to do. So
Jay, I'm curious, say someone has dialed in their lifestyle, they've increased their carbs, and they're still in a state that is not ideal for them. Would you ever consider using estrogen as part of their therapy?
Yeah, it's a good question. So many of the women who I'm seeing who are peri or postmenopausal are seeing symptoms, right? There's this conglomeration of symptoms that we see involving hot flashes, involving potentially more irritability, sometimes weight gain, sometimes more of a tendency toward bone loss, that happens slowly over time. And obviously there's this desire to be free of those symptoms, and estrogen has been that promise. And you even hear it a bit here. They're like, these things aren't going to totally protect you against osteoporosis. You still need to do a bit of the diet. And it's that's not that we're really far from what the literature is showing here. It's not saying you take estrogen therapy and you're totally protected against heart disease or osteoporosis. when you're looking at those clinical trials, some of the more recent ones that are even the ones showing support for it, you're talking about a very small change in subclinical atherosclerosis with no change in calcium scores and, no difference in plaque built up. Like, we're talking about very small differences here that I think are getting incredibly blown out of proportion when people then go to their practitioner and they're being sold this as the solution for their health and for all their symptoms. And to be fair, it does often help with the symptoms like hot flashes and like some of the other stress symptoms that Kate was alluding to, that women tend to become a lot more sensitive to once peri and postmenopause, come on. But if we're effectively addressing the lifestyle, normally that severely reduces those symptoms. And it's something where I think there's been a lot of, if we even back up, there's this assumption that what we're seeing during that time is all due to estrogen deficiency, right? There's no more estrogen. We see it in the blood. It's all gone. And so that's why you're seeing all these symptoms. But the reality is, A, there's still estrogen in the tissues. The idea that this is an estrogen deficient state is totally missing the fact that most of the estrogen that's going to be produced in that situation is just not going to be making it into circulation, but there's still estrogen being produced in the bones, in the heart, and elsewhere. It's not an estrogen deficient state. And you can't look at the blood to really identify that, especially at that point. And there's also, in that assumption that this is an estrogen problem, they're forgetting about how important progesterone is as an anti-stress hormone. And so when you lose that progesterone, you are going to be way more susceptible to those stress symptoms. And you're going to notice hot flashes when your blood sugar drops, when you might not have noticed that before, or when stress comes on. And while estrogen can help support or prevent some of those symptoms, or at least improve some of those symptoms in some women, a lot of times it'll come back to bite them later on. The symptoms will come back later on, or there will be unintended side effects or consequences. And then the other piece as well is that we can get those same benefits not only from addressing the lifestyle, but if needed, providing a bit of progesterone, which can be incredibly effective for those things. It's not as immediately effective because we're working through more of an anti-stress mechanism. It's a much slower effect, which is the same thing we see for bones, for example, for osteoporosis, where estrogen does have this benefit of growth in general. It's basically a growth hormone. It's one of its primary functions, really its primary function. And for the bones, it can lead to growth quickly. Like it does have benefits in protecting against bone loss. But progesterone can do that also really effectively, but it just takes longer. It's a slower process in terms of the way that it stimulates the osteoblasts to promote bone building. And pregnenolone could do a similar thing as well. It helps to prevent the bone breakdown and increase the building of bone. So we have this kind of dichotomy where, like many other stress hormones, you can provide cortisone, for example, or prednisone and see an immediate anti-inflammatory effect. But that doesn't mean it's something we want to do. It doesn't mean it's something that's going to be A, a long-term solution, or B, not coming at a long-term cost. And we see that parallel situation here where if we needed to go with hormone replacement, so to speak, or just hormone supplementation, leaning into the progesterone, pregnenolone side, I think is a far better route to go for all of these concerns. Again, assuming that we have gotten to that place where the foundations are in place. If you're looking for guidance in understanding how to create a sustainable bioenergetic diet and lifestyle so that you can lose weight or resolve any other health issues you might be working on, then head over to jfeldmanwellness.com/call, where you can sign up for a free call with a member of the J. Feldman Wellness team who can provide you insights on your individual health issues and make sure that you get the support that you need on your health journey, whether that's one-on-one coaching, group coaching, or the do-it-yourself energy balance course. We've helped people reverse everything from insomnia to fatigue and brain fog, as well as severe digestive problems and everything else in between, and we'd love to help you do the same. So again, head over to jfeldmanwellness.com/call to sign up for a free call. But I think what we're seeing here with this clip is just one of the conglomeration of this media frenzy right now about the magic of estrogen, and the reality is so far from that. Even when you manipulate the studies to find a very specific scenario, a very specific subset of women where this is providing some benefit, and then you do a controlled trial to test it, and they're not seeing these incredible benefits that they're finding in some of the observational data or in when they reevaluate some of the older studies. And so I think there needs to be a lot more care there. And the idea that this clip even needs to be here saying, hey, don't forget about diet and exercise when you're doing your hormones, tells us how far skewed that whole industry has gone.
Yeah, absolutely. I think again, there's this idea still. I mean, we want it to be easy, right? We, like Mike was saying, slap some hormones on and we're good to go. And I think so many of us, well, maybe not us, so many people still fall for the idea that there could be this prescription that could normalize and neutralize their suffering. Kate, I'm wondering, when you're researching and sharing your knowledge, if someone is still convinced that estrogen might be a helpful support or solution for them, how do you teach them? Like, how do you meet them where they're at and start to describe to them maybe some of the downsides or some of the dangers of using a supplement, an estrogen supplement?
Very good questions. And there are some metrics that you can assess, because estrogen will actually naturally lower metabolism and lower thyroid function and lower thyroid conversion. So for a lot of women, and they'll actually reach out to me with some of my posts and they'll be like, hey, there are some of the things I've actually experienced that I feel better taking estrogen, but I've noticed that I'm much colder. My hands are colder. My body temperature is colder. I go, well, that says something. It's actually having an inhibitory effect on how well you are producing energy, because it's just one of the things that it does. So assessing your body temperature is a great way to see the effects of estrogen. Now, if they are also on progesterone, and it depends, because a lot of women postmenopausal will take progesterone every single day. So that could counteract and kind of inhibit some of those effects of estrogen. And that's basically what progesterone does. It's kind of the counterbalancing hormone. It's not inherently balancing, because you actually will have a lot more progesterone that has to balance out a little effect. I mean, you don't need a lot of estrogen. It has a big effect. So you need a lot more progesterone to balance out those effects. But as long as it's there, you don't seem to get as many of the negative effects of the estrogen, but some still do. And some women now aren't even going through menopause, they're perimenopause, and they're already being put on hormonal replacement therapy to kind of make them feel better through that process. So temperature is definitely one of them. Another one is to measure their prolactin levels. I have seen this numerous times with women on hormone replacement with estrogen. Their prolactin levels are way, way too high, way high. And, and depending on like when they actually get on, some of them are like on a patch and they take it. If they put the new patch on, they'll get a bigger kind of metric or number right after that. But you do start to see higher prolactin levels. And prolactin A can tell you more about what's going on in the tissues as well, but it does seem to increase with increased, prolactin will increase with increased estrogen levels, which always makes you ask the question, because prolactin will elevate and it will start pulling calcium out of the bone. And so certainly we know that estrogen is being promoted as this miraculous thing to help women with osteoporosis and inhibit them from getting it. And it doesn't really do that. It can certainly, as Jay said, slow down bone breakdown. The osteoclasts do slow down. It doesn't improve osteoblasts, doesn't really improve bone building. So you really don't see a lot of better improvements in there as far as with the estrogen. It can certainly slow down that process. But the question becomes, it could also be having these other mechanistical effects on your body, like increasing prolactin, which could actually be creating some bone issues. Bone density isn't the only way we can measure how good your bones are. Like bone strength and the microarchitecture of your bones, they all matter. And so it could also be creating some other effects in your system that you're unaware with. I always like to tell women things like, look, there are certain illnesses and disease that women are more prone to. Hypothyroidism. I think we have like a 10 times greater chances of being hypothyroid. Autoimmune issues. We have a far greater chance of having an autoimmune issue. Gallbladder issues. Having your gallbladder removed. Dementia. As women age and men age, we have, I think, a 60% chance of greater of having dementia. And some people will say, well, that's just because women live longer. And there is a part of that, but when we look at it with the same ages, we still have a much greater chance of having these kind of illnesses. When women are between the ages of 25 and 40, we have I think 40% greater chance of having a stroke. So why? Why is that happening, right? What could be fundamentally happening in a woman that doesn't happen in a man? And we have a ton more estrogen exposure, 10 to 20 times more estrogen exposure over our lifetime than a man does. And so we need to take that into consideration. And because why would all that be happening? So if we just look at that molecule and we test it on these short-term trials, or, we do these observational trials, short-term, it could show a lot of benefits. It definitely shows it lowers cholesterol, lowers LDL, and maybe it offers some level of vasodilation to your vessels. So we get all of these, look what all these things it's doing. It's a little bit excitatory to the brain. So women will think they're sharper, they have better cognition. But what is it doing after 20 years of exposure? In addition to maybe you're still under stress because you're actually still not fixing the problem. You're just taking this hormone. What is that looking like? And we don't know. And so I think it's important that they know everything and they can kind of assess their own physiology. And the other thing I think when women do start taking it, one thing I hear is, well, what I took initially, I was on the lowest dose and then that kind of stopped working. So I had to take more. And then that stopped working and then I had to take more. Now I'm feeling colder, but at least I don't have hot flashes, right? So what is really going on is kind of, and so if you have a look at the other metrics, then they can kind of see yeah, maybe this isn't the right path for me, and I'm not going to tell them not to. I mean, I'm going to give some information. You got to make that choice for yourself, but let's look at everything and kind of assess it and see what, we want your system to work better ultimately. And is estrogen really fixing that?
If you enjoyed that clip, you'll definitely want to download the free Energy Balance Food Guide. The Energy Balance Food Guide will help you determine exactly what to eat to optimally support your metabolism and help you lose weight, improve your digestion, get amazing sleep, boost your energy, and so much more. The food guide makes it extremely easy to get started with a bioenergetic approach to optimizing your health. So head over to jfeldmanwellness.com/guide to download your free Energy Balance Food Guide.